All
Hey,
right. Hey guys, how's it going?
how you doing, Krister?
Good to see you guys.
Good.
Good to see
The
you.
Men in Black, although I think Gabe, you might be navy blue. I'm not
It
sure,
is
but
navy blue, but
it's navy. Okay.
I will accept it.
Yeah, so it's the three guys today. The ladies weren't able to make today for various reasons, so we're excited to have the space to ourselves, and we can get into the topic today, which we decided today really just to kick around what we're seeing in the teams that we are coaching, the teams that we're a part of, and teams that we're leading, and really just to have a free flow conversation. But before we get into that, guys, what's on your minds coming into today?
I think it's definitely with a heavy heart that right now in my mind is what happened just recently out in Texas. I think it's affected a lot of us. Just the nonstop barrage of news that comes from it. So just I was very sensitive and raw, I would say is how I'm feeling at the moment. And but still,
So these school shootings in the U.S. is
yeah,
just it's something very unique to the U.S. in
yeah,
particular, right? I mean, it's like there's something in our culture and in our psychology. Which the guy who created the movie there, Bowling for Columbine, I forget what his name was, really kind of traced this back to just the origins of this country, which were rooted in violence, slavery.
yeah.
There's been a lot of death in our country, and that leads to intergenerational trauma, right?
Yeah.
It's just not been healed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you, man, and especially as I think we all are parents of children, and just feels like rolling the dice, sending our kids into school.
Yeah.
I'll say the same thing as a parent of two young kids, but then also thinking about how it affects our clients and coworkers, which is in what ways are they acknowledging or not acknowledging how that's affected them right now, and not to make it a topic of an entire team meeting and so forth, but just acknowledging that I'm as I think about engaging with my team, I'm just wondering, if that's something that maybe that just needs to be said for them to move forward, at least to acknowledge it. People are processing it in different ways.
Yeah. What else for you, Gabe, coming in today? Is Texas been on your mind, or is there other
as a parent, absolutely. But also I'm just super excited about I'm going to tee up maybe our discussion today a little bit, which is I'm seeing some more demand for the type of work that we do and the way that we want to do it.
That's great.
And I think it maybe came from the pandemic and the fact that people were not able to spend time together, at least in a very rich way. So I'm starting to do more traveling, starting to get more requests for in-person type work, bringing people together from different continents, from different states to actually have a conversation about what their team is doing. So I'd say there's some I'll use the word momentum and energy around leaders understanding that I guess we've used this term before, this pent-up social debt or this pent-up team debt that hasn't been able to be effectively addressed in the last 2 years as well as they would like because of so much uncertainty. Right. So I'm feeling a lot of energy towards and excitement towards our practice as team coaches.
Yeah. And then we still have, COVID being a nuisance. I know a lot of folks that are just getting hit with COVID, and I've been on some calls with China, and folks have been on lockdown there for over a month. I don't know how long it's going on now. It's just it doesn't seem like any end in sight. So it's just a really pesky. We're all wanting to get out and get back. I've been doing some in-person stuff, which has been great, but there's been a lot of pesky stuff still with this virus that doesn't seem to want to disappear from the scene.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. So what I'm coming in with today is, kind of building on these themes of what happened in Texas and the overhang of COVID is just, what I'm seeing in the teams that I'm working with and the organizations is still a lot of need for space for healing. And, just space for people to process what they're going through. And I was saying this to Adam a little bit earlier, that I've been thinking about, the different stages of grief that an individual goes through around loss, but collectively, I also think we as a society go through stages around loss. And, I think one of the common first stages of loss is around denial. And I almost feel like we still haven't I think we may still be in denial. We haven't come to grips still with what actually has happened the last couple of years, right? It's so numbing that it's almost too difficult to deal with. And so we just kind of stuff it. But I don't know about you guys, but I do feel like the teams that I'm working with are still showing signs of stress and fatigue. And then, the restructurings that are happening are just adding on layers to that. But for the listeners out there, I'm, as listeners may know or may not know, I'm an external team coach. So I do this work, externally, but I do a bit of, training of team coaches and all that. I'm part of a team myself at 16 Conditions and, with the podcasting team at the Team Coaching Zone. But you guys are interesting in that you're probably more internal, but you are leading teams, you're coaching teams internally, but you do some teaching as well. And then some of you, I think, do some consulting outside. So is that a fair representation of how you guys are showing up today in terms of your relationship to teams? And then I know you're leading teams in your families, especially you, Adam, with a big team of 6 kids, I think. Right?
Yeah. I'm always coaching. That I would say that's a fair assessment. We do have a very unique situation where we get to play both internal coaches as well as do training. And I think that just gives us a little bit more, a richer context of some of the things that we approach things with. And that's really, I find myself and Gabe very lucky. We're very similar in that.
Yeah, I'd say I know the strategy I have for how I try and build my learning is anti-fragile. So learning in the inside, learning on the outside, some team education, some leader education. And I just gave a talk yesterday for a group in Romania. Awesome group of professionals out there. And I'm just reminded that you really don't know something until you have to teach it. And so a lot of the stuff that I've been doing has been internalized and shows up as unconscious, what do they call it? Unconscious expertise or whatever. And then when I have to teach it, I'm like useless for a moment until I can sit down the night before and go, hey, how do I really do this? And how can I really be of service to people that want to do this in a skillful way and not just watch someone that has it in their bones? So I've been more humbled about getting back to my teaching roots because I'm very passionate about helping other practitioners be as effective as they can to make the impact in the organizations in the world that they want.
So I'm looking at your backgrounds and I see you've got a Kanban board up there, Gabe, and Adam, you've got a whole wall of books that looks like the same book back there. So I'm curious, what are you these days are handing out to the employees? I
was hoping that you wouldn't ask about these books. I'll say this: the books behind me is more of a visual gag than anything.
Okay.
What the book is.
Yeah, but you gotta, if you're gonna be a visual gag, you can't have the same book.
So it's not that it's a bad book. This is the book by Gary Vaynerchuk, which I know a lot of people know. He actually just had a conference up in Minneapolis. So he's a big proponent for blockchain and NFTs in particular. So the reason why there are so many of these books back here is because part of it is because of Gary's influence. Gary is very, very influential. So he was running a special where if you buy a dozen of his books, he basically gives you an NFT for it.
Okay, so you fell sucker to that play.
I wouldn't say that because honestly, the cost of it wasn't really that prohibitive. The return,
but the NFT may be worth it in the end, right?
It actually was. It was definitely a good return. But anyway, I wanted to mention about what Gary's really trying to, I would say, do out in the space is I think he's taken it upon himself just to teach everybody about a new technology.
Right.
And he does it with a message of, look, at the end of the day, we're all human beings too, and you can really get caught up in it. There's a lot of fervor.
I know
and
we're all into
getting into the
crypto in
space,
this call, the three of us,
but
right?
he keeps reminding us, like, you got to be nice to people. So that's what draws me to Gary. He's still very grounded in, like, listen, you have to treat people with respect. You have to, motivate. You have to influence and do the things that treat. If you remember that you're dealing with human beings, it becomes easier. So that's what I like about him. So I have no problem supporting him and buying two.
You just got to give those books away, Adam.
I know.
I mean,
actually,
that's the hard part.
That's what the intent was. But the problem is, I don't right now because we're not traveling. Ideally, I would have given these away by now.
You pointed out the Kanban board in my background, Krister, and of course, I think that's sort of where me and Adam sort of made our mark in our own careers, was helping people to organize at scale using agility, lean, Kanban, these sort of like modern management methods, which there's completely a huge demand for. But I'm noticing that even though the requests that I'm getting in my organization are still about that, like how do we organize at scale, team of teams type of stuff, that I'm getting more leaders really being more serious about getting alignment at their leadership team level.
Yeah.
And understanding that if that isn't there, and if they're not a real team, then they're not going to be successful. So I'm seeing this really interesting shift from leadership teams and organizations kind of operating as teams in name only. I call this an operating committee, which is just a bunch of functional leads.
Yep.
To really understanding that to even come out of this 2-year sort of anxiety driven era and significant change, and then the great, whatever, people leaving work, whatever
resignation.
The great resignation. They're realizing that you can't address those with an operating committee. So they're really, so I'm getting some more really interesting and requests more than usual around leadership teams actually realizing they're not actual teams.
Yeah.
They're just a bunch of folks who report to somebody and then give their functional updates as a department and then move on.
Speaking my language, Gabe, I was just on 2 pitch calls yesterday for top team work with 2 major companies that, proactively came out of the woodwork and are seeking this very thing of how do they get alignment across, all these functions and become, it's really about enterprise thinking and having an enterprise perspective and being a real team at the leadership team level, not just a group of individuals. Yeah. So I think you're really speaking my language there. Yeah, but something you said too, Adam, were you going to say something more, Gabe?
No, I was going to actually give a little bit of a different perspective here. And Gabe kind of mentioned his current environment being a little bit more open to the leadership coaching and team launch and things like that. But on the flip side, I would say, to be fair, my observation is depending on the environment where you're currently working, right? So it's interesting that we started this show and you asked us the question, Krister, so where are you at today? Like, where's your head at? What do you feel? I almost feel like we need to almost approach organizations in that same vein to kind of say, where are you at, organization? Because there are definitely organizations out there that may not be prepared. And this is a lesson I've learned over and over and over again, and it doesn't seem to quite stick always with, apologize. It doesn't always seem to stick, that is, you need to meet the organization where it's at, and you need to meet teams and leaders where they're at. And that's a very important thing, because if we try to force it, people get frustrated, right? Because there's an outcome I think people are trying to get to, and if it doesn't happen, people feel like, oh, they went wrong, where actually, and just naturally, they may not be ready for it. So I'm seeing some hesitancy on the other side of the spectrum. But again, it's where are you at? So I think this is a normal and a good question always to ask when you come from a coaching perspective, is to ask, where's this organization at? And is this a good time? And I think there's timing that needs to be part of the conversation too.
Yeah. No, I just had a team coaching session last week with a team that one of their loved team members was recruited out to another company for a dream job. So it was a positive departure, but they were just devastated by loss. And so we pretty much spent the whole session, just an hour-long virtual session, but it's really a little bit about just creating space to grieve and talk about what people are feeling. But what was interesting about it, it wasn't just the loss of the member, but it's the nonstop restructurings that are happening. This is a tech company that's taking a toll on the team. And I think it's, there's only so much people can take. And I think the sad thing is, I remember when I was going through graduate school, I read this great book, which I actually want to dig out again. If I don't have it, I'll buy it again. It's called Images of Organization. And it's by Gareth Morgan. And it basically talks about different metaphors for organization. So the classic one is the organization as a machine. So these metaphors are oftentimes implicit, but we operate with an implicit theory about an organization. So the organization as machine, which really came out of the industrial age, it's still very prevalent, right? And this team, and then another metaphor is organization as a living system. And then there's organization as a power hierarchy, or organization as a network. And so anyways, there's kind of interesting, metaphors in there. And I think this could be a really rich space for us to work with teams around. But the thing that was coming up as I was listening to this team grieving the departure of the member, but the critique about the nonstop restructuring, was their body language was using images as if people were like just machine parts that you pull up, you move them, drop them into that team. And it's really a sign of the organization as a machine metaphor is still alive and well and dominant. And I think there's a big disconnect there, right, between where people are. And I don't know, maybe, I critiqued I quipped on a LinkedIn post earlier this week just around, I don't know, maybe it's AI and automation and robots are the only ones that are going to be able to keep up with the rat race and the rat wheel of this kind of speed and just moving people around all the time. I just don't know how much human beings do we really want to create that? Do you want to create organizations where people are able to shift around that much and, that frenetically? Do we want to normalize that? That's a big question I have. I get the whole thing about moving faster, being more agile and adaptive, but at the other hand, is some of that unnecessary and inefficient and ineffective?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I grew up in the whole, I think most of us doing modern work had grown up in the whole using industrial management thinking in the modern workplace right now. And but to me, it all comes back to what is the nature of the problem, or what is the nature of the work, and then what's required and available of the people and the system organization to address that. Like, instead of asking, like, should we automate? The question is, I think I've heard this saying, you guys as well, anything that should be or anything that can be automated should be automated. And I think it's great. Like, that's the actual point, because you don't need thinking, at least rote thinking type of people to do automated stuff. But I think the nature of the work, if we're still addressing complex problems for other human beings, I would trust a human being over. That's me personally.
Yeah.
But it brings up the point. So the whole fungibility around human beings is an interesting take, because it essentially frames how you will solve the problem and engage with other human beings in your system, which is, are they just a badge, or do they bring with them some unique, again, characteristic and skill and experience that makes them valuable to your organization, not just for the things that they do, the outputs and your client satisfaction, but what about it makes your organization better for the people that are in it? So I don't know, that's hitting me hard as well, because I've had to say goodbye to a really valuable colleague, close colleague. That's Adam here. We were on the same team for 7 years. And it is something that you have to go through, but at the same time, it's still like, well, what is the work eventually? But I don't want to make it all about the work, but something that struck me, Krister, about the way the team you were coaching responded to that, which is, I often still encounter teams that have to overcome something first before that we can talk about doing the work of the team.
Yeah.
And so you described the fact that if they don't talk about the fact that they need to process this loss, there's nothing about even the collective purpose. There's nothing about the team norms.
We couldn't go to the task
that
work.
Could even be addressed, right? And so that is the role of someone, and in this case, it could be you as external coach, it could be the leader, or someone very highly emotionally intelligent on the team saying, wait a second, we need to talk about all these feelings about what's really going on because we're human beings before we can get to collaborating brilliantly, right? Which we all want to do. And so I experienced the same thing in my organization where there is both, there is like unplanned attrition. So someone wants to leave, like you're saying before. And then there's this uncertainty of like, hey, well, does that mean I'm going to be moved to another team? Or they moved this function over here and it's a duplicate of what I do. Am I going to be layered? And like layering and like, depending on if you're in a large organization, like layering is almost akin to like demoting. It's when you feel, and then so when we do something like that in an organization that seems like it's easy to do on org chart level, there's emotions about there's a loss of prestige, loss of perceived loss of skill and authority in the organization, even though nothing had happened. And until you can address that and get to talk about it, you're not going to be able to move forward on actually helping this team do its other stuff, which is what it's trying to do is service its clients.
Actually, I was going to chime in here with what you said earlier. Actually, what struck me when you described the automation piece and should we, right? Is it like that's probably a good question to ask because so much of organizations and companies now are looking to automation to make themselves more efficient. It's funny that it always goes back to compelling purpose, right? And the reason I mention this is because I think there is a general, not misunderstanding, or at least more attention being that, at least for agility, right? If you're trying to do something more agile, it's to produce more, but that's the misunderstanding. It's really about meeting the customer needs better, right? And that ties right back to a compelling purpose. So if
more sustainable way,
it's more sustainable, whatever. Because when you mentioned that, it just my mind just jumped to one of the stories from the book. This is Lean. I forget the name of the author, but very popular book in the Lean Agile community. But the first story they share is about how, if you think about how we go through getting a diagnosis, if something's wrong with us, let's say it's like cancer. So it's very inefficient because you have to book the appointment and then you show up and you do the first test and then you wait and then they come back with the results. So there's periods of wait where you suffer to finally get to the diagnosis and what you're dealing with. And they said, be careful because you can make this, if you really spent the time to think about all the touch points and where work is being done, at some point you can make the system better and make it move much quicker, right? To the point that if somebody can show up and say, all right, I don't feel well. And in less than a few hours and not even having to leave just from this first appointment, they turn around and say, all right, you have cancer. Is that a good thing? Like, we are human beings. We almost need that time to prepare ourselves to receive this news. So in a way, you do have to suffer the wait, but as human beings, we almost need to have that to be able to reconcile if we get good news or bad news. So if we make that too quick, that may not be a good purpose of speed, right? So that's where my head went to, because you were asking that question. And I think, again, it's okay to be nimble and agile, but to what end? And if we're trying to be nimble, what are we going to do better? So do we create more space to give counseling to the patient? So that just, this went right there for me.
I'm just thinking, teams that are going to be together for a while, maybe a year or 2 years, which seems like an eternity. But I'm almost feeling like it might be better to actually work in 3-month kind of increments, just to set expectations, because there's so much going on in the context around them that if they have a 1 or 2 or 3 year mindset that I'm going to be in this team doing this kind of work for the organization, you're very vulnerable and susceptible to the restructurings and all these external things that are going on that may disrupt that. So I almost wonder if it'd be better to contract for 3 months, because I have found, I don't know about you guys, but I have found the best teams that I've been a part of, we have really delivered in 2 or 3 months. We can deliver amazing pieces of work. And there's something about the certainty of meeting a piece of work, crushing it, and, it's time boxed, and maybe I wonder if that would be a better way to kind of set expectations, especially in the teams that have been contracted to be around for a bit longer than 3 months, because I'm just feeling like the disconnect between expectation and reality of the turbulence of organizational life is just traumatizing people.
I 100% agree around, at least my approach to when I engage teams. I'm always looking for the work and not, I want them, teams often, we get asked a lot, hey, my team's dysfunctional. Great. Okay. That's a true statement. They're dysfunctional in service to what? And then that gives us the motivation to actually do something together. So I always go back to Richard Hackman's quote, like a team that does good work feels good, not the other way around. And so we oftentimes are brought in to make teams feel good at the hopes that they'll be doing work great. And that just doesn't work out that way. And so I think there's a way you can intentionally engage with a team to find out that one piece of work that they can, and move the needle on a piece of work, or a part of a piece of work, or an entire piece of work, or a piece of an objective that lays the foundation for them to do great work again afterwards, to like get them to quote unquote feel good. But it's done through, at least through my approach with evidence-based 16 conditions framework. But what is that thing that we could help them move the needle on? And so, when I'm ultimately listening for what are the dissatisfactions in the room, it's like, okay, dissatisfactions in service to what? Is it a project? Is it a client that's dissatisfied? Is it your people that's satisfied? Okay, great. Now, if we want to move the needle on any one of those things, then we can get to work on building you a structure that moves that needle in 3 months. I think if it takes longer than 3 months, I would question whether they really can even design your work appropriately. If the work is so big that you can't even achieve something in 3 months, and then to me, I'm looking like in an endless feedback loop, which is you're working in a way that you can't even get feedback in 3 months. Then how do you know you're doing any good at all at what you're doing? And so I look at that as like, hey, how can we view the work in a way that allows us to gauge our progress, both in our delivery as well as our satisfaction and our ways of working in a reasonable amount of time. I think we can do it indefinitely, even less than 3 months, to be honest. And sometimes it has to happen in less than 3 months for the reasons that we're brought in. We're rarely brought in for brilliant teams. We're barely brought in for good teams. We're already brought in for teams that are already struggling, that are just trying to get to good. And so I think it's reasonable we should be able to get them to good in 2 to 3 months.
Right.
I'm wondering this question you have, Krister, about like just short ramp teams. Is it just being very deliberate about our org design and team design, right? Because there are some, like I mentioned, that Gabe and I used to be in the consulting world, and that was our norm, right? So it was designed on purpose. We jumped on projects for 4 or 5 months, and then we would switch completely brand new teams, new faces. Every once in a while, you get lucky, you work with somebody that you worked with on a project. But you're right. I actually experienced that same thing that you did, Krister, which was it felt like we accomplished something more from a short-term engagement. And for us, it was the norm because that was the consulting world. I think it was which book it was, but it was one. There are other companies out there that are designed this way too, intentionally, right? I don't know if it was Pixar or Amazon, but you get solicited to be on a team, right? And you have the freedom to move around teams as much as you want. And the goal there is to be able to grow your skills and get exposure to different people and get to do more interesting work. And that becomes a intentional design of the organization. So I think there's something to be said about that. Unfortunately, I think majority of the companies out there are meant to be long ramped, as long as we can survive until, something disastrous changes us or some different opportunity. But everybody's there for like, hey, I'm here for life.
So, Krister, I'm just curious about the teams you're working with. When you design an engagement, what are you looking for? Like how do you, like, what are you sensing? What are you listening for? What are you asking for? Like, if you were imagining a successful engagement after 3 months, what are you teasing out of them, or what are they telling you?
Yeah. It's interesting because, I do a lot of work with leadership teams. So I tend to pitch more 6-month packages or 6-month cycles because they tend to operate a little bit slower cadence and tempo. But I do feel like 6 months still is a runway that people can envision. I think, I always try to help leadership teams work on their purpose for the next 6 months, not the 1 or 2 year length of purpose, because if they're actually doing well as a leadership team, their purpose hopefully will change every 3 to 6 months. Right. So, and I do feel like what you were saying, Adam, in 3 to 5, 6 months, we should be able to move the needle on a team, or you were saying that, Gabe. And, so I think that's true for the leadership teams as well as the operational and project teams that I'm working with. And then I think COVID and doing all this work virtually, 100% digital and virtual, work has really challenged us to how do we accelerate and deliver value in shorter bursts, maybe more frequent sessions. So I've been experimenting a lot with that, but it's really helping them really discover right at the beginning of, in the next 3 months, if there's 1 or 2 big shifts you could make that we could help you make, what would they be? And to try to hang the hat around that. In terms of content around that, it's, for the leadership teams, it's around enterprise thinking, becoming a real team. They're operating as an information sharing team rather than doing decision-making and collaborative work. But yeah, and I think for the operational teams, it's about getting up to speed fast and delivering value pretty quickly, right? They don't have time for 6 months of ramping up. They kind of need to kind of get iterating and delivering right now in the short term, in a context where they may get disrupted and their leader may get moved, or, team member may leave. So that's why I go back to this whole, as team coaches, just as an aside, we recontract a lot with our clients. But I almost wonder if teams need to really get better at contracting themselves and recontracting again, maybe every 3 months or whatever the runway is, right, for them. I don't know if that's getting at your question or not, Gabe, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're just reminding me at the different levels of which we're all engaging, whether it's a work team, whether it's a management team, whether it's a senior leadership team. And I think you're right, like contextually, like some of them are more appropriate for shorter engagements than other. But something you brought up about, again, related to the great migration, the great resignation, which is I'm noticing that when teams are naming some of the things that they're experiencing the actual attrition, and then the inability to then find someone, then bring someone up to speed, which is a natural part of being on a team. But it's actually happening at a much more rapid pace, and they're not equipped. The actual team itself or the leader or the organization is not equipped to actually onboard at this level of turnover. And we're discovering that oftentimes that actual process of onboarding has been sort of like outsourced to someone else, or rarely never done. And now I'm seeing more teams motivated to figure out how to even expedite their own onboarding process and be intentional about it, because it's happening so often. Because we're going to get a new team member in 2 months, and we can't just drop everything and teach everyone all the ropes and stuff like that. And so that's actually coming up as a piece of work as well for teams, and a source of opportunity for them. It's not just about doing their day job and improving their existing process. It's about looking at this team as into its entire life cycle, which is when we bring someone on, what do we do as a team? Not, we just bring someone on and let them hang around for 3 months until they get up to speed. They have to be more intentional about bringing them into both the social system and the work system now.
Hey, Gabe, I wanted to ask you a question. Since we when we first started, we kind of brought up, we're on different ends about like the team launch model right now. And you mentioned, hey, your leadership is a little bit more open, and I'm not so much. Can you maybe, for our the people who are watching this, can you maybe give some insights about what's changed, what's happened that made your leadership team become more open to some of the coaching that you're doing right now?
Yeah. So my general philosophy on change is that it has to be painful. And so something happened between the beginning of the year and now, and it'll continue, I think, amplifying to the end of the year, is that something got really painful. And so I'll describe a general journey is that, through the course of COVID the last 2 years, organizations have just kind of survived. They had to pivot a little bit, but for the most part, they've just tried to stay above water, to stay ahead of this until they quote unquote come out of COVID. And then and I'm saying that we're out of COVID, but I'm saying now at the beginning of the year when things have loosened up around feeling if there's more certainty in the world, less anxiety about the future, at least the organization, then things started happening like the Great Resignation. And then teams started to be more intentional about their strategy right now. Like, hey, we just survived this thing. Now we can make some big bets or maybe make some big moves, or we've been punched in the face. We need to do something else to survive. And so they made a big commitment at the beginning of the year on where they want to be at the end of the year, next 2 years. And then realizing that, I guess, talking about this social debt that has accrued over the last 2 years, they weren't able to get aligned on it. And so so when I'm interviewing leaders right now, like, hey, why do you want to engage? What do you think you want to get out of this? The word clarity just keeps coming up over and over again. But for very specifically, the clarity, the reason they use the way they use clarity is, I need to be more clear to my directs so that they can be more clear to their directs. And until we address that, everyone feels like they're swirling. So it's lost all the anxiety. So I think there's this pain of now, again, I call it social debt or whatever you want to call it, but there's this point in time now where we're at where there's the level of anxiety and lack of clarity has become unbearable, uncomfortable now, where they can't even just do the business as usual type of work anymore. It's affecting their ability to do business as usual, which means if you can't do business as usual as well as you want, you definitely aren't going to be changing to a brand new strategy. So I feel like the pain is there. And so I'll quote Donna Rumsfeld, like, never waste a good crisis. There's definitely some anxiety at the senior leadership levels and understanding that this is a level of anxiety they have not experienced before in the organization, and the ways in which they've addressed it before, which is maybe just tell people to just bear with it. This, you'll come around. People aren't buying that anymore. They probably have way more options or more options, perceive they have way more options than they did before. So I'm just seeing that the leaders are coming to be are even more open about their own anxieties and perceived shortcomings about how to resolve this clarity amongst their own leadership team.
Gabe, what you're talking about is like the number one thing I'm hearing in the pitch calls I'm in with the leadership teams. It's lack of alignment. It's how do we kind of bring an enterprise perspective and a collaboration across our silos and bring clarity, because there's a lot of anxiety, right? In the absence of clarity, we create anxiety, and then we do all kinds of things to manage that anxiety. So
yeah.
And that, I have another angle on that, but go ahead.
Yeah. I just want to say something. It's like we've all heard, I mean, every single one of us and all of our listeners have heard the siloed behavior and lack of collaboration. We know that this before. I think what you and I are sensing and we're sensing is that the level of which that's affecting their ability to operate has become unbearable, to the point that they have to be vulnerable and actually look in the mirror and say, okay, we can't just keep doing the same thing.
The organization as machine is breaking, and it's limping along, right, with a couple of wheels falling off the bus, right, along the way. Yeah, but I was going to go back to this thing around anxiety, because one of the things I'm feeling, and I've been doing a little bit of reading about, it's kind of piqued my interest lately, is a lot of the work I do, it's always a function of coaching the team and creating a holding environment for the team, but it's also about enabling the leader to lead and hold the team as well. And I have a lot of empathy for team leaders who get a lot of flack, because there's so much anxiety in systems right now that a lot of it gets channeled into those holding those roles. And so as I've gotten to know some other leaders lately, I've gotten really interested in what is it that really drives people to become leaders in the first place in these organizations, and how they arise to the top. And interestingly, from the group relations or psychodynamic lenses, a lot of the people, what I've been learning about is that a lot of the people who arise to these positions of leadership come from oftentimes very dysfunctional backgrounds and families. And the way they survived those contexts was to achieve and excel. So they would find school, for example, a place that was stable and where they could really grow. And that led to a whole lifetime of really, in a way, overachievement. And because they didn't have really a good family background, and, you know, we all come from different kinds of challenges in our background. Nobody's squeaky clean, right? But anyways, this kind of manifests that these people oftentimes, because of the complexity they grew up in, they actually can handle a lot of complexity and psychological pressures when they're in these top roles. But it's a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, it enables them to sit with what for most of us would be unbearable amounts of pressure and complexity, you know, with high achievement, motivation, and all that. But the other side is oftentimes their the dark side or the shadow side shows up in them, you know, trying to actually create their team as like a family, which becomes a problem. And then you see all kinds of weird, dynamics going on there. So that's something I've been lining up actually some podcast interviews with people who are specialists in psychodynamic and family systems therapy, and who actually end up coaching a lot of leaders and teams where there's a lot of these family dynamics issues at play. But I think those things are more likely to come out when the pressure of the environment ramps up even more, right? The psychodynamic pressures, and we regress back to coping mechanisms that we learn throughout our lifetime. So anyways, that's an area. I have a little bit of training in group relations. I did a bunch of that in my graduate school, but I really feel like I need that lens again, because I'm really sensing that the leaders that I'm working with are just dealing with overwhelming amounts of anxiety, and it's showing up in all kinds of functional and dysfunctional coping mechanisms, you know?
Yeah, I was just about to mention that, Krister. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody describe using achievement as a coping mechanism, which is, and you see it in the pattern of young teenagers, right? When they when you're dealing with household stress, so you have very achievement-oriented kids, and then bad things happen, right? They fall into depression, and even worse. So it just never occurred to me that you bring it into the professional realm as well. So
one example of that, I had a team leader who is the chief information officer of a company. I won't keep it anonymous. But in a team retreat, I had them for 2 days. I had them doing some storytelling around the public narrative or the story of self. And so I modeled and shared a story. It's like a 5-minute story where you share overcoming a challenge from your life, and it reveals a bit about you and your values. So the team leader went next and decided to share that she had grown up with a mentally ill mother. And it was like the room just went silent, like a pin could drop. And so she shared this really powerful story of what it was like. It was such a defining part of her experience of a mother who wasn't really well. And it enabled her to become really adaptable and capable. But interestingly, it was kind of, a little uncanny, because I had interviewed everybody and I've gotten to know her a bit as we were going. And it was really interesting that she grew up in an environment of chaos. And she was very uneasy when things were running smoothly in her team. And unconsciously, she kind of would provoke conflict, because if there wasn't conflict going on, she didn't feel normal, which was really interesting. And I didn't connect the dots until she shared the story of her upbringing, which was a very powerful story. And one could argue maybe was that the best story to pick? I don't know, but it was very revealing about her as a leader. And again, I'm starting to have more and more of these kind of little windows into who we are. Doesn't get checked at the door. We bring who we are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that shows up in the teams we're a part of, right? In the social systems we're a part of.
I think as you tell those stories, I go back to another, at least Richard Hackman concept, like the leader attribution error. So a leader gets too much credit for things are going well, and then they get too much credit when things aren't going well. And I also too am having even more and more empathy for someone who is in a leadership role, whether they choose to or not, because we end up demonizing and scapegoating the person who's sitting in that chair when things aren't going well. And there's a lot of talk about what this leader should be doing. And, you can bring up LinkedIn right now and read 1,000 ways in which leaders are messing up.
Yeah.
And I think there's the empathy there that's missing, which is, okay, what part in their own developmental journey prepared them to be in this situation? in what ways has the organization supported them or not supported them. There's all these ways in which we can, scapegoat the leader and say, oh, let's look at this one attribute. Oh, that means that leader's terrible.
Yeah.
And they're not helpful, in my opinion, because you're missing all those other, blind spots and experiences that either make them who they are. And so I'm having that same realization working with leaders, just however they have found themselves to be there.
Yeah.
There's still ways we can have empathy for them and support them where they are. And everyone is in a different place in their own professional leadership journey. And then also just say team leadership journey, which we know is something different than just individual leadership. And so understanding for me, like my dream client is someone already saying, hey, I don't know I need some more help working with this specific social system, and not just the problem or not just, a group, but I'm now recognizing that a team is different than the other things that I've been doing up to this point in my career. I need them to do something more with them and for me and for the organization that I've never been able to get any other team to do. So yeah, I'm more curious about how they got to where they are and have more empathy for where we need to go and the things that might be quote unquote harder for that person, for us to go through in our engagement.
I don't know if you have any views on this, Adam, but I think, one of the catch-22s, it's that achievement drive, which enables them to move up through technical expertise and really being results oriented and performing. They rise up through the ranks, and then they find themselves in these roles where what got them there isn't what they need to stay there. And I'm scoping an interview. I'm going to have this guy, David Rothhauser, on in a couple of weeks. And we were chatting about this a little bit. And what he was saying is that his approach to team coaching is really about what he calls like team leadership coaching or leadership team coaching, where the focus is first just on coaching the leader for a while, building a really good relationship. And, then together the coach and the leader can then create this holding environment for then the team to hopefully learn and deal with the anxieties. But if we don't partner with the leader and create that bond, it's all about the relationship, which is interesting. And I think especially in environments where there's more and more anxiety, the strength of our relationships and our container, the holding environment, needs to become stronger. And yet I think we oftentimes just bypass that to get to the action. I think you were alluding to this in our just as we were getting ready to come online, Adam, that there's a anxiety to just get the work going at all costs in service of alleviating our anxiety, but that can be a fool's errand, and just, it's going fast to go slow rather than going slow to go fast, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a weird thing. I think people's normal tendency is to try to get back to some sort of norm. And maybe that's the desire, right? The norm of delivering, the norm of doing, the norm of just getting things done is where our desires are. So it leads us into some weird behaviors that try to get there. And then we gloss over all the important things. And I think you touched on it earlier, Krister, and I think it's a good concept, which is I think as coaches, we are a little bit more intentional about contracting, especially because of the nature of our work, which is we want to be very clear about, where this ask is coming from and who's asking for it. What do you need? So we do this thing called contracting, right? I think that's a skill everybody can learn, right? Especially leaders, but definitely the team. The team needs to have agency to be able to look at their situation and say, what contracts do we want to build before we get ourselves into a situation where we're like, oh, what just happened here? Like we're now just doing and we don't know why. So I think that's a skill that definitely needs to kind of be broadened for everybody.
Yeah. Any other interesting themes for you guys? One of the ones that's been coming up for me is just around, are teams still necessary? I know there was a Harvard Business Review article that came out about this. And, I know my views on that. I almost feel like as the environment gets more dynamic, we actually need people more, and groups and teams are a natural, resilient way. When you hear stories about war, when people go into war, and we were chatting about this a little bit earlier as well, Adam, what the only thing that becomes matters is the people that you're with, and it's the bond of the band of brothers, or the unit you're a part of becomes your purpose. And it's because the environment is so existentially threatening that the only thing that matters is being there together. I used to do a lot of work with the United Nations, and we would find this with humanitarian teams that would go in and work in wars, in natural disasters, and just the threat of the instability in the environment demanded a level of connection with other human beings to just manage the anxiety of that was necessary. So I almost feel like teams are a natural, a way we can organize to be more resilient and meet a lot of our psychosocial, emotional needs. So I think they're actually more important now than ever. But maybe we need to reimagine and shift our thinking around what we mean by a team. And, some of the things we've talked about, length of team, tenure, and, how do we deal with the dynamism of the environments that we're operating in?
I love that provocative title. It's like saying, do individual contributors still matter? It's like literally to start another.
Yeah. That's where the robots and AI comes in.
Right. But I think it comes down to this, which is that let's not oversimplify who we're in service to and what we're trying to accomplish. Teams are great for some work, and teams are great for not other work. Individuals are great. Individuals are great for some types of work, and individuals are not great for other types of work. So I'm less inclined to oversimplify that problem and say, what are you trying to achieve? Right. So I'm just using a sports metaphor. If you're a basketball team, is it much better that you have plays that you learn and run together and can run them against another team? Or do you just figure out that whoever gets the ball shoots it? Right. And you could play basketball with a bunch of individual contributors, and we've seen that in real life, and it doesn't end up well. But I just think to ask that other question, which is, who are we in service to, and what's the best way to go about achieving that purpose? Is it with individuals and teams? Do we hand off the work from individuals to teams? There's so many other permutations in which to address complex work. That's a better question to ask.
But therein lies the rub, because it implies you're clear about what your purpose is.
Well, there we go.
So that's the kicker, because a lot of the teams don't know what their purpose is, even though they've been brought together for a reason, but they don't know exactly what they're doing or what they're focusing on.
Can I just add one more rub? Because I was reading Senior Leadership Teams Again, book by Ruth Wagman and her colleagues. And in the chapter where we talk about compelling purpose, at some point, someone, and actually even Richard in his book says, legitimate authority. Someone with a legitimate authority ultimately has to, breathe life into the actual purpose, take some stands, make some hard choices. So in that point on, the way we go about it is we have a group try to come together and draft its collective purpose, and then a legitimate authority reinforces it, with authority that they have and the charisma or whatever it takes to get others to follow it. So I get what you're saying there, Krister. So there is sort of a tension around there.
No, that was a theme that came up on a pitch call yesterday, where again, the top team is defaulting to information sharing and not owning decisions. So they were, adopting the rapid decision-making model, but starting to really see that a lot of their work as a leadership team is really about actually owning decisions. And some of the decisions need to be collective ones, but other ones need to be made by one or two people. But really, who has the D was what they called it. Who has the decision? So it was really about trying to empower people to actually own their role and do what they're been asked to do, which is make some call tough shots. Right, which we all just will avoid doing if there's always choosing between two bad options, it feels like, or two types of pain that you're going to inflict on others when you make these choices, right? So yeah. What's percolating for you, Adam? I know we're maybe coming up on an hour here, so we should start to wind this down, but anything else you want to get into today, or you
I do have a little sneak peek of our next episode. So this episode, we're just having a nice friendly chat.
Yeah.
Three guys. But next episode, we have something actually planned for, and that is again, we're sitting here kind of on a Zoom-like environment, and that's been the norm for the last 2 years. But there's something new that's been happening, and that's teams that are starting to work in what's known as the metaverse, and it's kind of combining new technology. So it's meant to be a more immersive experience rather than just this, very flat surface, interaction. So you do, put on a VR helmet, and it feels like you're actually in an environment with your colleagues, and you're looking at, the actual work itself. So you could be on a work board, or you can actually have a almost face-to-face conversation with this avatar, and even give virtual hugs and stuff. So it's interesting. And that's kind of what piqued my interest about, like, is this the next wave, or is this just something to kind of help with the situation? And, do people find it useful? So we're actually going to bring on somebody who's more of a VR metaverse expert, who can kind of talk a little bit about it, and we can kind of poke his
adding
brain.
the third dimension to our virtual team coaching, right?
It
might make it actually, more interesting.
He actually does coaching through VR majority of the time. So he takes his group of people through a VR experience. Wow. So you have this collective experience in the metaverse, and
love to learn about
I'm just interested. I would love to see if that's something that we could look to as the future of teamwork.
So that's coming up. Again, I'm going to have a series of these psychodynamic family systems therapy kind of folks coming on. For sure, we've been talking about having a bit more around diversity, equity, and inclusion in teams. And so those are some themes that we have coming up. But if there's listeners out there, have themes, feel free to go on to YouTube, punch in the comments. We'll check those out. You can also email producer@teamcoachingzone.com if you have ideas of episodes or people that you think we should be bringing on to interview, either in a panel like this, a group conversation, or one-on-one pre-recorded interviews. And it's been great kicking this around. So what's the one takeaway from today that you guys are each taking, so we can wrap up today's conversation? Is there a theme or a nugget or an insight? I really enjoyed this chat. And we intentionally came in without pre-scripting what we were going to talk about.
Exactly.
We just wanted to kick it around and see what emerged.
I just got to say, for me, the fact that the systems are so complex, that team coaching truly is brings in multiple domains. I mean, it requires us to understand, like, if you're going to do, again, the psychodynamic stuff and the relational stuff, it just proves how many tools that we need to have available to us to effectively serve our clients. So that's why I'm so excited about continuing to do our work, because these systems, these problems always exist within these social systems, but we're coming up with new, or I'd say novel, and even digging up proven ways which we've forgotten about to engage with them. So I'm really excited about that, and really pushing my own curiosity on what else am I leaving off the table to be a better service to my clients.
I love that.
And I guess what I found insightful through our conversation today is, again, that statement that you made, Krister, about accomplishment as a coping mechanism. And that just reminds us that, within these teams, there's real human beings. And you said it best, but when you join these teams, you can't check yourself at the door. You bring your whole self into it. So there's definitely a need for, again, it's such a complex system, especially when you're including human beings in it, right? So it's never we could use this template or just these tools. There's so much more. So the more we can learn ourselves, take it upon ourselves to actually learn what the system needs, the better we are positioned for helping it. So I think that's really what's resonated for me.
That's awesome. I think, what's coming to me is that that quote by Einstein, that the world we have created as a product of our thinking, it cannot change without changing our thinking. And what I'm aware of is that me as a team coach, I need to level up and do self-work. I think the leaders we're working with need to level up and do self-work. I think the teams we're working need to level up. So, to become fit for purpose, I think requires this deep growth work. So I think that's what I'm taking out of today, and feeling some motivation to keep plugging at that. And that's what makes this exciting and challenging times in work, right?
Yeah, I just appreciate that, as a community, and I really mean that. I mean, we all have good friends and that are doing team coaching, and we just can't do it alone. We can't do the learning alone. We can't do discovery alone. So making it a community goal and building relations while doing it is really what it energizes me about the work that I do.
Awesome. Guys, we're just almost on the money. 1 hour. Great to be with you in conversation, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next time on the Team Coaching Zone podcast. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening. Appreciate it.
Bye.